Hey guys, today we are going to be talking about the Great Tribulation in Matthew chapter 24. Probably one of the most controversial, most misunderstood, most talked about issue in all of eschatology. So today I'm going to actually present you a new view that you may have not heard before. So let's roll the intro and we'll go ahead and get started. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about Matthew chapter 24. Primarily, I've spent a lot of time thinking about it because when I was younger, like in my teen years, end times, eschatology stuff, the rapture, no rapture, preterism, partial preterism, this stuff was very popular back then, or at least, in my section of the world of Christianity. And so a lot of people were talking about it. And I myself never really got too much into it. And I just listened to other people's conversations and, I put some input here or there. But typically speaking, I never really talked about it with a lot of people. And so then, long story short, I was like, well, hey, maybe I'll start talking about end time stuff. So I said, maybe I'll make a YouTube video. And that's what I did. It was started out making YouTube videos doing eschatology, primarily for people that I knew, because it was like, hey, nobody knows what I think about eschatology, so I should make some videos on it and, send it to them or whatever. Anyways, long story short, we're coming back to eschatology now, and we're going to spend the whole summer of 2020 talking about end-time stuff, because why not? It seems like a great idea. But before we get too far into this video, I just want to take about 20 seconds to tell you about my YouTube channel and why I think you should subscribe. First of all, this is a Bible study channel, and what we do here is study the Bible because we take the Bible seriously, and we seriously study the Bible. So if you are looking for a Bible study that's online, that's absolutely free, you just found it, and you can go ahead and click subscribe and the bell notification. Also, I forgot to tell you, my name's Jorden Clark. I publish a brand new video every single day. So today, I want to talk to you about the Great Tribulation, but I want to build context as to what we're actually doing, because that term's like super, super broad, and we really have to build great context as to what we're talking about. So this morning, I wrote a note. I'm going to show you the note. I'm going to read it to you, and you can look at it. But it's a note that helps us really bring context, and it also tells you the approach that I'm taking to this matter and the way that I'm viewing it. It's very important to understand how I'm looking at it, the lens that I'm using to view this stuff. So let's go ahead and read the note real quick, and then we'll talk more about what we're going to be doing in this video, because it's going to be really, really interesting. So the note I wrote this morning basically is pretty simple. It says, the text says that you will be delivered into tribulation, and that's Matthew 24, verse 9, and continues talking about Jerusalem's destruction. But Matthew 24:21 tells us, for then there will be a great tribulation, such as not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever. And a few verses later it says, but immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. We get hung up on those days, and I go on to explain it. That's a really good question. I say, what does those days actually mean? Is Jesus referring to 70 AD time frame, or is he referring to something else? The short answer is that nobody really knows, and that's just the truth. Nobody knows. Nobody has any idea what Jesus is actually talking about. Nobody really knows what Matthew's trying to do as an author. I'll explain that later on if we have time. So basically what we're doing is guessing, and my guesswork is pretty much simple. I think that those days, I go on to say down here, pretty much I say that I think that those days is actually referring to the whole period, basically all of 2,000 years since the inception of Christianity until now. And the reason why I think that is simply because if you look up tribulation, the word means in Greek, I'll just show you actually. We come to Blue Letter Bible and scroll down. It's what verse were we talking about? Verse 14, is that what it was? That's verse 9. Right here, we click on tools, and we can bring up the text here, and we'll get tribulation. And so we'll open that up in a new tab, go and check it out, because it's a good idea to look up these words sometimes. We look it up, and basically what we find out, it's actually used in the LLX, which is the Septuagint. It's used about 100 times. So that's pretty unique. If you really want to do a great word study on that, you have to go to the LLX. We're not doing a word study in this video, but it's basically what it means. So the King James translate this as tribulation, affliction, trouble, anguish, persecution, burden, or to be afflicted, okay? And that's primarily like what the use actually is. And so the word tribulation is not just like a lot of people hear the word tribulation and they often just think of stuff they would see in the book of Revelation, okay? And I will tell you this, and this just sounds crazy. I know it doesn't have a lot to do with what we're talking about, but I don't think the book of Revelation has anything to do with Matthew chapter 24. I know that sounds absurd and nobody ever really talks about that, and there's not a lot of people who really try and advocate that view, but that's what I think. And I've thought that for probably about 10 years or so. It just seems reasonable to me. I think that the book of Revelation is totally separate. But the point is that people, when they look or hear the word tribulation, they often think of like beasts coming out of the sea and this happening. It's like, dude, that's not what Jesus is actually talking about here. He's not talking about that kind of tribulation. He's talking about persecution. He's talking about trials. He's talking about painful events, suffering, the actual Christian life. In other words, you're not being persecuted because you're an atheist or a theist or an agnostic. You're being persecuted because you're a Christian. And he says this persecution will go on and on and on and on and on. Now, this is where things get very interesting. When we come to Matthew chapter 24 and we read the section here about the abomination of desolation, which, of course, I did a video on this the other day. But when we get down here to verse 28, it really helps build context for us. It says, wherever the corpses are, there the vultures will gather. Okay? And so why is this important to understand? There are two groups of people. There are the preterists who basically say all of the stuff in Matthew 24 is talking about the destruction in Jerusalem that occurred in 70 AD. And the other people are the futurists who say, no, everything is future. And this is super, super important to understand because when we're dealing with issues like these, most of the time people only talk about these two views. They don't talk about anything else, which is why I decided to make this video and kind of present a totally different perspective that nobody never really thinks about and never really talks about. So here's the thing. When you look at this passage and it says, where the corpses are, there the vultures will gather, or some translations says eagles. What that passage means is this. I don't know if you've ever been driving down the road or not and you've seen a dead animal on the road, but typically if you see a dead animal on the road that's pretty fresh, there'll be vultures, flying above and they'll come down and they'll eat the body because that's what they do. So when it says where the corpses will gather, there you'll see the vultures or the eagles, it's talking about the same thing. It's talking about a lot of dead bodies. It's talking about a lot of people dying. So their bodies are laying out all over the ground everywhere, and the vultures are flying around. And Jesus is saying, look, when you see the birds up in the sky, there's bodies down below. Why? Because it is true, the Romans came in and destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD. That's definitely true. Okay. Obviously, that's what he's talking about. I mean, this has a big thing in there. But you have to understand something about tribulation. When you look up tribulation, it's not talking about some stuff that happened in the book of Revelation. It's not talking about, crazy cataclysmic events. It's not talking about that. It's talking about Jerusalem. It's talking about Judea. They tell us that he's talking about Judea. They tell us that he's talking about Jerusalem. So we have pretty clear context on there. But it also tells us about tribulation. And this is the tricky part. Because we have to ask the question, who is the tribulation coming upon? This is the mistake of preterism. The preterists think that the tribulation came upon the Jews. Well, that doesn't make any sense at all because they say, hey, this is about God ending his covenant with these people. Sounds all fine and dandy until you really start exegeting this passage and you realize the tribulation is not talking about the Jews. Jesus is talking to his own followers right now. The Jews had already rejected Jesus, so it doesn't even matter. Rome came in and destroyed all of Judaism. It destroyed the entire religion. Literally, it destroyed the entire religion. They just didn't burn down Jerusalem. They burned down all the cities, okay? And so Jesus is talking to the Christians, and he's saying, look, you guys got to get away from this area. So the tribulation is not coming upon the Jews who rejected Jesus. The tribulation is coming upon the people who are following Jesus. This is where things get interesting because the tribulation is not stuff referring to the book of Revelation. The tribulation that Jesus is talking about is persecution. And what happens after 70 AD? Well, a lot of persecution. I mean, a lot of persecution. You have Nero, you have Domitian, you have many other emperors after that. It went on for about 200 or 300 years, and it's still going on today. There is persecution happening. Now, also pay attention when you go down here, and you need to do this on your own, but when you go down to verse 29, it says immediately after the tribulation. Okay. Now, some people get hung up on those days. They say because it says immediately after the tribulation of those days. Well, again, what does it mean by those days? If we can establish, which I think we have, if we can establish that the tribulation is not coming upon the Jews, but it's coming upon the Christian, then that brings context to the word those days, or the phrase those days. Those days are these days that we're in right now. It's not talking about those days as in, 70 AD, a couple years before 70 AD. It's not what he's talking about. Or 2 or 3 months or 2 or 3 weeks while the siege is taking. That's not what it's talking about. There's no way that's what it's talking about. More than likely, this is probably a time frame here from 70 AD onward, because it says immediately after the tribulation of those days. Which days? The days of tribulation. How long does the tribulation last? I don't know. It doesn't tell us. It just says the tribulation of those days, the persecution of those days. That persecution is still going on today. And we know that Jesus has not come back in the clouds and he's not gathered his elect yet. So for you partial preterists out there, you're always looking for a split in the text. Where do you split it? I would probably argue that this is where you would split it in the text. And for you futurists out there who say, yeah, he's predicting the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, and he's also predicting future events, which of course that's what he's doing. That's my view. I'm not a preterist or a partial preterist because I think preterism's heresy, but I'm a futurist. And so I think Jesus predicts the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And I also think there are events in there that have not happened yet, like gathering the elect. That has not happened yet, obviously. So where would you split the text? Well, here's where you would split the text, on the word tribulation and tribulation of those days. So instead of having a tribulation that was only for 70 AD, and instead of having a tribulation that's somewhere in the future that hasn't happened yet, we can look at this passage and say the tribulation has already started and it's still ongoing, and it will continue until Jesus comes back. Listen, if you never thought about this before, let me know in the comments below. If you have your own viewpoint on tribulation and what you think tribulation means and what you think tribulation of those days, which days are those days? Let me know in the comments below. I have some more playlists up here if you want to go and check them out. Don't forget to click the big red A, because when you do, you subscribe to the channel. You get a brand new video every single day. My name's Adam Jordan Clark. Thanks for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next video.